Let's do it.
Hello, Jan. Welcome, Jan. I'm having a great honor today of welcoming a new guest, Jan Carbonell, who I accidentally met stalking online for study groups in Barcelona and encountering a movement called Saturday's AI, who Jan happens to be the chairman and co-founder of. So I was really surprised, and after checking his profile, I was really impressed by all of the projects and experiences that he has had as a data scientist and entrepreneur. For instance, he is the creator and the CEO of Akademy.AI, which is a bootcamp education platform in Barcelona, which also cares about diversity and participation in data science, especially for women, which I find incredible. And he was also nominated to MIT Under 35, thanks to his augmented reality project for visually impaired. And well, I think I can just keep talking about things that you've done a lot, but I would rather pass the word to you. And the first thing I would like you to talk about would be actually the last project that you participated in, which is called the Open Ventilator. And
sure.
Maybe you can explain how did you participate and what was the goal, what you guys have achieved so far?
Yeah. So we were in the context of coronavirus, which, let's say, took everybody by surprise. And I'm part of a young talent accelerator, you can call it like that, named Celera, which basically selects people for 3 years and then gives them like the personal and professional training they need to sort of maximize their full potential, right? And in that group, an engineer started chatting because we had the ventilators. There was a news in Spain saying that there were not enough ventilators. Turkey had just seized ventilators from Spain. And he started chatting and saying, okay, how critical is this, right? And his name was Javier. And another doctor from the group replied and said, okay, listen, like this is no kid's game. We can't just do something that pumps air and that will help the patients. There's many more critical factors that go into play, right? And then the founder of Celera reached out to the guy that had the initial idea and said, listen, like if you're willing to go for this, I can give you the initial funds to basically get the first prototype going, right? And many people in the group were like, yeah, like let's support this. Like this is doable with the help of the doctor, which is named Javier Asensio. Basically, we're able to calibrate most of the medical parameters that are, let's say, necessary for those ventilators to take into place. And we got started with the design. And it was just a really, really interesting project because, well, first I started in Denmark. I was replicating it on my own in my flat to see how scalable it was to do in other countries. Then I went back to Madrid. But essentially, it was really interesting to see how all the different interdisciplinary areas mapped into place, like designers, programmers, engineers, doctors, into a fully complete product, let's say that. And then we ended up actually creating one of the first devices that was homologated in Spain. And we received funding to produce 50 ventilators that we have delivered to hospitals all over Spain and Latin America.
50 ventilators are already operating.
That's so incredible. To give you an idea maybe of the scope, a normal medical ventilator, like medical grade, costs around 25,000 euros. I think we're producing them at 5,000 euro stops, right? So it was like a 5x decrease on price with, I'd say, very reliable components. Of course, the caveat was that we were only doing one function, which these ventilators do, which is the supported ventilation on critical patients. Like they take into account many more constants, and there's different degrees of quality within ventilators itself. So I wouldn't dare compare it to like a 25,000 one. But if you only needed the assisted breathing and that was critical and there were no resources available at that time, that's what we were able to provide.
No, that's incredible. I mean, I admire your action that you have taken, because especially in Spain, the situation, as probably people know from media, has been the worst in Europe after Italy, or one of the worst, let's say. So I personally, I always try to take steps in order to like make my part, so to say, not to put anyone in danger. But when someone takes one step even further, like it's incredible, guys. So what you've done.
Yeah, I think so. Like looking back, there wasn't a particular moment that I said, okay, let's do it. I think in the spirit of what Celera is, everybody's always willing to help, and I think what happened was that so when we were at actually like last week before the coronavirus exploded, sort of, I happened to be in Morocco with the founder of Celera, Javier Garcia Martinez, and we were sort of like sitting down in the terrace, having a tea for what probably is like €2, enjoying a beautiful view. And we sort of realized, this is probably the last time that we're going to get to travel in a while. And we don't really know how the world's going to look like. So, with our free time, I think a lot of people decided, okay, I could be watching Netflix, and that's not a criticism to that. I'm sure I've watched plenty of shows on Netflix during the coronavirus pandemic, but it was more of like the idea, let's do something together and let's see how far we can take it. And it went way farther than any of us imagined. And I think that was like a really beautiful thing to see, because you had a lot of team members that were really qualified and you sort of trusted everybody to do their part. And then when you stitch them up together, those things worked out. And it was like a cool experience in the sense that for many people, it was their first entrepreneurial experience. So I think having the ability to experiment without, let's say, the risk. I mean, there was a risk, of course, because, if we put this device to somebody and it failed, somebody could die. I'm not saying that there wasn't a risk, but I mean that everybody was sort of conscious of their part and was making their best bet to make it work, right? And at the end, I think it overall, being able to contribute to this was very significant.
Yeah, no, really cool. And now we have touched a little bit on the, let's say, social project part. I also know that you've been very active in the data part, which is another part we're interested in our podcast. And so that's why I would like to switch to another topic of ours, which is your project called Akademy.AI. So first of all, could you elaborate a little bit on what motivated you in the first place to create a bootcamp organization?
So maybe I can start first with why I wanted to learn data science. Yeah. And I was in consulting, and in consulting, we were advising automotive companies on how to prepare for the future. I did several benchmarks on all the available automotive companies in the market, and I think Tesla came number one on several of the benchmarks. Like, it was not just the fact that they could do autonomous driving, which I don't even think they had launched at that time, but it was like customer experience, app rating, and so on and so forth, right? So every single automaker was sort of like struggling, and I would say they are still struggling now to catch up, despite what I think at that time they underestimated. Like if you look at quotes from automotive CEOs from 2015, it's like, Apple doesn't do cars, Tesla shouldn't do cars, I don't do software. So, everybody, let's stick to their game. It's just a fate that's going to go away. And it didn't happen like this, as we've seen now for the crazy stock market valuation. But I think for the first time, I got a sense that the software was the thing that really mattered in computers, right? Like if you think about it, when you are in a plane, right, you don't really care about what's the type of plane that it is. I mean, if it has 3 seats or 2 seats, if it's intercontinental, of course, like you care a bit. But in reality, let's say Ryanair and Lufthansa are flying the same planes, the same models, right? It's just Lufthansa gives you a much better experience at a higher price, and Ryanair just makes you beg for the trip to be over while you did save a decent amount of money, right? But what matters is the experience. And in cars, that was going to be delivered through software. And when I looked at Tesla, I think many of their software had to do with the fact that they could potentially deliver on their autonomous driving promise with essentially the cameras. And at the time, there was also the leaders and so on and so forth. But I basically started thinking about data as a thing that was just going to happen in automotive, right? We knew that was a promise. And then I started looking at all the other sectors. We were also doing health, and the customer was aggregating several analysis from tests onto animals, and I was like, okay, like solution here is also data. And then we moved into another sector, and I was like, okay, like it's also data. So the thought that started to emerge in me was, okay, in the future, data is going to matter much more, because we essentially, what the really cool thing with data, or the really cool thing why internet works, is because we can track back every single step that any person has made, right? Like when you go on the internet and you decide to buy something, Google can, or your browser, mostly Google, can tell what steps took you there, right? And you would want to think it's something random, but in reality, there may be some ad that nudged you towards it, or there may be something on Reddit that you watched that essentially decided you to click on that product on Amazon, right? So you can essentially track many customer journey that you cannot do with physical stores. So every day now we're trying to bring that experience into the real world as more as we can, right? Like now smart fridges want to know your email, and they want to know where you live and how old you are, because they're trying to cluster and aggregate all of these types of data, right? So essentially, I was like, okay, data is going to be really, really relevant. And I think that the people that are able to code and craft the data are the ones that are going to have a saying in, let's say, the future, right? Like, if you want to put it like at the very hyperbole, like in Minority Report, I'd rather be the one coding the algorithm, or otherwise I am bound to the decisions that it makes. And Minority Report is not the best example, because there are two humans that they have like psycho abilities, let's say it like that, telepathic abilities. But the idea is that you want to be the one, like if you don't create the algorithm, you're going to be the one influenced by it, right? So you want to make sure that you're in the creation part to get the best outcome possible, not only for you, but I would say for the whole society.
Yeah.
So that was the first thing. And then I started learning data science, AI on my own programming. I had done some course in Python, but hadn't really thought of it much at university. And I did it on my own. So we started the nonprofit Saturdays AI. I joined a bootcamp. I joined a master's degree. And I kind of got the feeling, so when I was at the master's, I got the feeling that what they were teaching wasn't right. And let me elaborate on that. I had done courses online that were much cheaper, but much better than the master's. And yet, I was there spending my time on something that I was paying a great deal amount of money and time for. And it didn't make sense to me, because I was like, why am I here? Is it just for the credential, or am I here really because it's one of the 10 best masters in Europe? It's one of the first ones on AI. And I believed that they had the best education, right? And then, well, my feeling was I went back. So I had the chance to basically talk with companies through the nonprofit that we founded. And we're like, what do you care about? Like, do you care about the credential, or do you care about the fact that somebody can do the work? And many of the companies, and at that time, there weren't so many credentials in data science, let's say, were like, listen, if someone can do the work, I don't give a fuck where they come from. Like they could have been a carpenter and they learned it. Like if they can code, like that's all I care. And I think that's a very standard argument in the computer science area.
It's something that you hear a lot in all types of, not only back end or AI. I have friends from front end development, just the same thing. Yeah. So then like the feeling that it started to emerge in me was, well, how can we deliver the best learning experience and in a more condensed manner, so that we can increase the way or the speed at which we get people in the data science field, right? With the idea that people will learn really fast during the bootcamp. They would be at the basic level, and I'm not gonna like do any bootcamp promises or like come here and come out as a full stack developer. Like that's bullshit. Like the bootcamps that promise this and then they teach you for 9 weeks. The thing is, either you know programming beforehand and you're able to get an improvement, like let's say from 30 or 20 to 60, or you don't know programming and then you get to a 40 or to a 50%, right? And I think that's how it is. Like that's what our bootcamp promises, and that's how they get you in the door. But the reality is that they do a very clever trick, which is companies are willing to take you from that 50 to the 100, right? Like just the thought of learning programming, it's such a magical experience. And I had lots of fun when I did my bootcamp. I was like, wow, like this thing is working, right? I can do a website. It can be responsive. I can push it to a server and Heroku and whatever. So that's amazing. And then,
But the thing was, okay, for data science, there's two layers, right? There's like the layer where you're just data analytics, but who is actually teaching them how to be AI engineers, how to be like the people that can modify the models? And when I looked at the market, I didn't see that there was any bootcamp that was doing that. I knew that my university wasn't training us well enough. So I thought, okay. And actually, one of the funniest things that happened is at my university, when I got accepted into a master's, they made a really strong point. Like they really wanted to point out that 300 people had applied for the master's and only 40 of us got accepted, right? And I thought, okay, like only in the city of Barcelona, I at least have 260 people that are willing to pay that amount of money, and that actually I would be able to save them a lot of time, right? And from that, I extrapolated, and I was like, okay, if you look at the cities, only Barcelona and Madrid can do it. Like there was a huge gap on the amount of people that the field needed versus the amount of people that were being trained.
Wow. Like, first of all, I agree so much. Like, the data is the new oil. You kind of even started with the cars, let's say the oil part. So now data becomes the new oil, which you can basically notice it everywhere. And second of all, I can relate so much to you because I basically started to learn to program and get interested in AI after having some kind of negating experience, because I started to hear and read lots of stuff that was really disturbing from people like Yuval Harari, maybe you know him, authors like
Sapiens.
this who exactly. So I was just terrified, but by thinking about the future, until at some point you kind of realize, oh, I have to either take part in it and make it like better, or just be a passive individual who will just, well, let yourself just experience the fate, like what other people will program for you. So yeah, definitely, I could relate a lot to what you have said.
Yeah, in that sense, I would say there's some things that I don't like about the state of the AI field today. Like, for example, you were talking about oil. I think it's the perfect analogy because it's basically controlled by a set number of countries or corporations in that case, right? So there's like Facebook, Google, Amazon, and they are there because in data, whoever gets first or whoever has more data has a huge significant advantage. And those are massive companies, and they invested heavily onto their data science, their AI, their cloud services. So they have those capabilities. And that's something that it's concerning. To be honest, it's concerning because you want that data to be for the people. And like, for example, nowadays, like just as you are staring at this podcast, you have agreed to so many things with your phone to give away to Apple, to give away to Google, to give away to Facebook, that, it's your data and you're just doing it because you have no choice, because the alternative of not having WhatsApp and not having an iPhone and not having Gmail doesn't work. So essentially they're just sucking it up to the point where they have a monopoly, let's say with Google search, and nobody can sort of fight them. It's the same thing with Apple, with the Apple Store, right? Like you're just like, this is my platform, I created it. You want to go through it, it's 30% if you're charging any money. And I think it's sad because it really increases inequality. And that's one of the things why I wanted to join the field and fix it, right? But like you say, sitting outside the field and complaining about it, you're not going to be able to do much. Like you can't, like as a politician or as a lawyer, to comment it and say, okay, like that's illegal. Or, I mean, of course, there's something illegal that should be stopped. But what I mean is that these companies have massive amounts of money. They can pay the best lawyers. Either you create an alternative to that, or you're just bound to people's options. I think the best analogy for this is like a train, right? It's basically being in the field of AI now. It's kind of like being on a high-speed train. And we can use Spain's high-speed train network as an analogy because it really leads to some shitty destinations that have no sense. They spend a massive amount of money to bring it to towns that maybe have 30 people living in it. So I'm not saying the destination is where you want to be, but if you want to have any choice at changing the direction of the train, you have to be in it. Like otherwise, you're just going to stare from away how it goes away through you.
No, totally. Like I believe we all have to become not just consumers, but rather prosumers. Like we produce and we consume the technology. We have to be creators of it. So now to the education part, like You have experienced education in a traditional way and also in a non-traditional way, so outside of the university. How do you see the future of education? Is it going to be unis that are going to change their mindset, or online courses or boot camps?
My thesis is that most traditional universities are eventually going to die. And I'm not saying because, I hate on universities. I've been to one. I really enjoyed, let's say, the learnings that I got through industrial engineering at UPC. But I think it's a matter of the system and how universities are created, right? Just the way you give away a slot at a university. And I'm saying this, both my parents are university professors. But at university, once you get through this, you do enough research and you teach enough classes and you get your doctorate and so on, you get a permanent position, right? Maybe that doesn't happen until you're 40 or 50 or 60 in some cases. But nobody can move you from that. And that is true for most universities, I would say. In the US, you even have the problem where, because they're charging so much massive amounts of money to students, they have to sort of justify the expenses. So they are hiring staff, like administrative staff, at crazy rates, right? But the problem that you have that is, once you have somebody on a fixed position, sometimes they stop caring about performance, right?
And
I'm not gonna give any names,
right?
but I do know like a story about a university professor that just didn't reply to any email. Like he just erased them. Just, you get an email, bam. In my master's, there was a particular professor whom any emails that came from outside the university address, it would just bounce back. I actually never got a reply from him. But you can't touch them. Like if they show up half an hour late for class, nobody cares. They leave half an hour early, nobody cares. They can't do anything. So that's a big mistake. But the other big mistake that it has is that universities are, in a way, and don't get me wrong, I love public education. I've been able to enjoy it and get it. And I think it's something that we have to continue to produce. But the way the current system is set up, universities are decided sort of like by politics, right? At least in Spain or in Catalonia. If you want to change the university system, you have to craft a new program. It has to go through some regulation. It has to go through some law. It takes you, 6 years to change the program. So you want to keep it for at least 10. And that's a big problem in fields like artificial intelligence, because it changes so quick. Like things from 2015 now are so outdated. Like it's just like for fun papers. And the reality is that when I went to my master's, one of the first things that I was really pissed about was like, why are we learning this thing from 2008? Like, it's great that you are a teacher that did a paper on this subject, but honestly, it's no longer relevant. Like, we should just move on, right? And the problem is that they have no incentive to do that. And I think the incentive is for the bootcamps or for the outcoming competitors to say, I'm going to seize that lack of upgrade that you're doing, and I'm going to get people. Because if companies don't care about the man in the middle, which used to be universities, I can just deliver them directly to companies. And that's the way most bootcamps are, let's say, undercutting traditional education, right? That being said, I would say bootcamps still have a lot to learn or a lot to improve, because the promise to get someone to be like, for example, I'm super upset by that, but the promise to make someone a full stack engineering in 8-9 weeks is bullshit. And we all know it, but nobody says it out loud. Like you have these ads and it's like, you see it on the start, there's a person that doesn't know how to code. And then at the end of the ad, he's like a genius and he's getting like over 40,000 euro salary, whatever. And then, but you start nitpicking, like you look at their hiring rates and they're like, okay, only like this rate only counts if the person stated that they wanted to work before they started the bootcamp, and afterwards they become eligible. So you can clearly see that there's something shady going on there. And I think because the bootcamps were sort of forced to go away from the traditional education system or even evaluation method, none of them have certifications, right? So essentially they can do what they want. The only thing that matters is that the companies are hiring. And yes, the companies do hire, but there, some of the bootcamps, for example, have a high bounce rate. Like companies hire and they're like, this guy is shit, just fire them back. And then nobody says that. And then as a person that's done the bootcamp, okay, you struggle, you have to learn on your own, and then you get a job. And it actually takes, like most of the bootcamps, you don't get a job like day one after you get the bootcamp, you get it 6 months after, which means there's a lot of individual work that goes into that, right? But it's a model that works partially. Then I think there's also like there's this trend with like, let's say, long, more seasoned bootcamps like Lambda School, Stripe School, Microverse. I think that's going towards the right direction. It's basically saying, okay, we're going to take the length of the university, but it's going to be much more intense. And you're just going to be on a, let's say, with a team of peers getting through this. And you don't have to pay it now. You pay it later, right? And that's something that is really interesting because I remember I'm going to be honest with this. I quit my job, I had some savings, and when I decided I wanted to do a boot camp, I didn't have the money for it. Like actually,
Yeah.
I had an interview with the guy from the boot camp, and I was like, "Listen, I love your boot camp. I just don't have the money. I don't have 6,000 euros to put here on the table
Yeah.
because I have to pay for my rent and I have to pay for my master's later." And I was really lucky that he said, "Okay, let's figure something out. You can do some business selling for me. You can get referrals. We can, if you bring a person to the boot camp, then I'll discount you, a customer acquisition cost and so on and so forth." And I was really, really lucky to get that deal. But I know for a fact that I would have not been able to get it. And I think many people are in my situation how I was like that, because
Definitely, yeah.
either you have some savings, you have some good family money, you have a bank, or it takes to pay back. And sure, you can get a loan, but nobody guarantees you that you're going to get
yeah.
that money back. So I think income sharing agreements are definitely a good idea. I would say I love the idea because you're basically saying only if the bootcamp is successful, then you will pay it back. What I don't like is that some income share agreements are kind of predatory. Like it's a really big amount of money. Like I think, for example, Lambda School takes 30,000 euros, right? And I mean, sure, if you're able to raise my income over 60K, you deserve a cut of it. But I wonder at sometimes if that's too much. And I know there's a cap to those and so on and so forth. But I feel like there should be a fair pricing in the middle. And hopefully the thing that's going to happen here is like if this model really works, there's going to be enough saturation in the market that there's good competition and they're basically, outdealing each other. Then there's from coronavirus itself, there's a really good trend from micro schools, right? Like I think some people in the US are realizing that they can just take their kids out of school and not homeschool them, but like hire a teacher for 4 kids and they will have a much better experience, right? And I think now being in Denmark, I really get to see this. Like I think in Denmark, in private kindergarten, you have one person for every 4 kids. Like it's crazy to think like you have one person where 25% of the day is dedicated to your kid. So their day is to your kid. Like,
that's very
awesome.
good.
Yeah,
It's
I mean, I remember when I went to Spain, I was like 20 kids, like one person maybe.
Yeah, in my country, it's 30.
Yeah,
so.
Exactly. I think that explains a lot, and of course, it's the same thing. I think this is going to work for higher education as well because I mean, when I was in university, I skipped plenty of classes. I skipped a bunch of classes. I remember like reading at the syllabus, and I was like, okay, like I looked at the lecture, I was like, this I sort of understand. No need to go to class, or I also like party my fair bunch. But I mean, you would do whatever because there's no moral obligation to go to class, and you always feel like you can catch up or whatever. And I remembered I went to Cambridge. I had a friend there. I didn't study at Cambridge. I just went there for a hackathon. And I told my friend, hey, tomorrow is like it's snow. It was awesome. Like we woke up. His room was like you could see the Newton. Well, not the Newton tree, but like it was Trinity College, so you could see like it was the place essentially where Newton had developed his theory of gravity and so on and so forth, or at least that's the hypothesis, right? And I told him like, dude, it's snowing. Like this is freaking Harry Potter. Skip class. And he's like, I can't skip class. I'm like, why? He's like, because there's 4 students. Like they will notice if I skip. And I was like, oh yeah, shit, that makes sense. So I feel, if I was at university and it was a class of 4 students, I can't skip. I'm gonna go. So I think that trend is also really good. So I mean, there's different layers onto it. I think universities are gonna have to readapt and reinvent, and the ones that do it are gonna survive. The ones that not are gonna die and are gonna get crushed by the boot camps or whatever comes next. And yeah, I think that coronavirus is giving up some interesting trends. Hopefully, it also has to deal with the accessibility because most boot camps, you had to be there in place. And I really believed in in-person education. I think there's a particular layer of in-person that you can't substitute for online. Like the serendipity, the encounters, the people you meet, the people that take a coffee with and you talk your life. Like that's definitely there. But where are the bootcamps for Africa, where are the bootcamps for Latin America? I think, we should be able to give them an equal amount of opportunities. And what I would expect to see, or what I would hope to see from the bootcamps, is to have, the same way there's a really good trend now with SaaS products where you price it based on the GDP of the country. It would be great to see like the bootcamps also priced on the GDP of the country, or if you're taking a cut of the salary, like that's also aligned in that way. But that's what I see on the trends.
Like I love the idea of bootcamps, and I would love to participate in one. But just as you say, it's not just my opinion, but from lots of friends that I have who are data scientists or are somehow related. Mm-hmm. It's just very expensive. Let's be honest. Yeah. And to me, it seems like a little bit. We talk a lot about AI for everyone. Like let's make AI accessible, but to be honest, it's not there yet, I would say. Although there are some alternatives, but they are not perfect. Again, if you're doing MOOCs and online courses, and you sit alone and you're at home, it's just nothing comparing to studying in a group of like-minded people who have the same passion and goals. And maybe it's a bit of a straightforward question, but why are they so expensive? Is it just because the people who create bootcamps can put this price, or is it because they have to? What would you say?
It's interesting. And first of all, I definitely have a conflict of interest here, but I'm going to try to remove myself from that and explain it from, let's say, my first impression when I joined the bootcamp. And when I joined the bootcamp, the first thing I did was I counted the heads, and we're 20 people. Mm-hmm. And I knew that each of them was paying 6,000 euros. So I was like, okay, there's just 180K lying around in this room, And I mean, that bootcamp had a lot of franchises. It was a Le Wagon, by the way. It had franchises in like 27 different cities. And I was like, what are they doing with my money? And at that moment, I kind of felt like an imposter because I hadn't paid, although I paid it back, I would say, fully and even more with the deal that we made. But, I was like, okay, they have a bunch of money, and the place looked nice. There were resources, but, at any moment where something was not right, like there was one person that was not paying attention to the community. There was one guy, like, for example, there was one guy in the bootcamp that should have never really been there. And I felt like he was only accepted because that guy had money and that guy was willing to pay 6K. And I was like, fuck, if I had the bootcamp, I would kick this guy out. Because I don't give a shit about it 6K. I give a shit about the other 19 people that really want to be here, have a great experience. I felt that's greedy. You just took that person's money because, fuck it. They're going to deal with it in the spot. When there was no toilet paper, you get pissed. You're like, what the fuck, man? I'm paying. There's 180K and you can't get toilet paper. Like those are a layer of things. And it gets really annoying. But when I did the bootcamp myself, I suffered the other layer of it. Like if you don't have 20 students, if you have maybe 10, and you're paying, let's say when we had our co-working, you're paying really premium co-working because you want to deliver them a good experience and not for them to be in the basement. You made the math at the end of the month. It was like, oh shit, like this doesn't add up. Like it's just we've sort of reached like a state of ramen profitability where we could pay the whole expenses. We could never pay ourselves any salary. And I was like, wow, like it's like two ends of one straw. I think that, or let's say I'm going to have the hinge that many, if not most of the bootcamps are not profitable. And this is not for the cost of the teachers, which they're well paid. I think most teachers at bootcamps are well paid, and that's fair. It's not for the cost of the space, which is fair, but it's for the acquisition cost. Like getting a person in the door costs so much money to the bootcamps. Like that's why, if you can bring anyone, they'll pay you, they'll do whatever. That's why also, like if you ever click on any bootcamp ad, you're gonna get bombarded for 4 weeks from that bootcamp and any of their competitors on Facebook, right? And I think the ones that are able to succeed are the ones that have like an unfair advantage, like a really great marketing engine. I think Lambda School, for example, is an example of that. I feel like at a point, probably what Lambda School has is because they have such a great marketing, they don't have to spend that many money on that. But the people that get in, maybe let's say lower quality, it's somebody that didn't want to do or shouldn't have done a bootcamp in the first place, and then they just saw this thing. Oh, everybody talks about positively. They're like they talk themselves into it. They're like, oh, I should do it. Let's do it, right? And then they have to compensate it in the middle, like while the course is going. That's my hinge. If you, for example, are a bootcamp that has a dealing with a co-working and you get a discount on the space, potentially you get some cuts on that. Overall, it's really, really expensive. It's not more expensive than university, because if you think about it, university, for example, in Spain, let's say a master's costs 6,000. Yeah, but that's subsidized. Like you're paying 25% of the cost. The real cost is probably around 24K, right? So it would be sort of similar in terms of the number of hours that you are delivering. What I do feel is that boot camps should create models in which they're fair to their students. Like I'm talking about, I think income share agreements is a way for that. I think scholarships is potentially another way for that. And hopefully, like scholarships, if you get the companies that want the talent to pay for it, that's a great deal. But there's also some scams, I would say scams, smart techniques involved between, right? Like, for example, what is a partial scholarship? Like, is it just a discount? It's a green layer. It's a gray layer because, I remember, like, for example, when there was Ironhack, they did this advertisement, and what is it? We're giving 300,000 euros away from scholarships to attend our course. And I was like, I mean, if your customer acquisition cost is 1,000 and it costs you another 1,000 to place a student, you're just cutting those costs, and you're getting great marketing because you're going to go into every major newspaper. And you may have a deal with a company that, they say they put their name on it and they launch it or whatever. And I was like, oh, that's really clever. But is it for the people? I remember I had stories as well from friends that they applied for a bootcamp and then they didn't get the major, like the number one scholarship. And then they didn't even got the partial scholarship because, I think giving full scholarships and partial scholarships is great. And we did it. Like I have done it. And I if we did it was because we believed that those people didn't have the resources to attend the bootcamp and we wanted there in the first place. But I had a friend that applied for a bootcamp, didn't get the scholarship, and then she gives a call and, oh, you're getting a discount. And she matched it with a friend that had the scholarship, and like, we're paying the same. It's both of us 4,000. Like, is it really a scholarship? That's the thing. But to fully address what you opened up with, what about AI for everyone? What about accessibility? And I think that was the whole reason which we started Saturdays.ai, which is basically you learn AI with a group of peers, 15 Saturdays in a row, and you basically do a project at the end of it, right? And it costs, I don't know, there are cities that charge 50 euros, there are cities that charge 300, but it's a much more accessible price. That's the idea, and that's why we want to do it. And we've had really great success cases. But I see the other optics, like with AI Saturdays, all we can pay for is the space, which many co-workings give to us for free, coffees, and some t-shirts. All the people that go there are volunteers. I volunteer my time myself, but I'm also sort of like aware that, if those people decide to stop volunteering one day, this whole thing is over, right? So there has to be some sweet spot in between where you are getting some money enough to pay for the teachers and that you're not, let's say, profiting of the hopes of the people, I would say. That's how I would think some bootcamps do it, because, I think what really upsets me about the bootcamps is not their price, but their marketing model, in the sense that a bootcamp should be judged by their outcomes, and they're judged by how good their ads are. Like if you get bombarded by ads at the bootcamp and you join it, you never regret it. You just do it and that's it, because you never see what everything, well, you couldn't regret it if it's really bad, but you don't really see what's out there. So the thing is,
you can compare
this model
so much,
doesn't help create the Harvards and the Stanfords. It helps create the power MBAs or the greatest marketing gimmicks.
Well, talking as well about, in general, entrepreneurship and business opportunities, I would like to switch to another part of our interview. I would like to discuss like your personal and professional development journey, because you have been having quite an impressive one. And first of all, what struck me is like your entrepreneurial spirit that you have. And I would like the question I had immediately in my mind was like, where does it come from? Was it your family? Was it, I don't know, ads online that
become an entrepreneur?
that manipulated you in the right direction? How did it happen?
I definitely have had a notion of hard work in the family embedded on me. Like my grandfather was a, what do you call it? I don't know how to say it in English, but farmer, right? So he was a farmer.
Yeah.
He moved to the city to work for a factory, and I, of course, didn't witness that. But the stories that I heard from my mom and my grandma is that he almost worked 3 shifts a day. Like he would his house was right next to the factory. He would go home, eat, then go back to the other shifts. And that was the whole thing. And, he was never there essentially for my mother, but because he was really busy providing for the family. I think that, let's say, probably created a sort of spirit in my mom that she later passed on to me. One of the things that I really appreciated from my mom was that, there was a lot of times that I was really close on giving up. And it was through university or through the company, anything. Like I had really, really low moments. And, there was a time that my mom told me this story that actually really inspired me. And she was like, when I first started university, your grandpa thought that women should never be able to do that, in the sense that, you should just get married and go and find a job. And he would he kept talking to me and saying, you're not good enough, you can't do it. And I was really defeated. And what something that my grandma did was she would go back, like when my grandpa wasn't there, to my mom's room and be like, you can do it, like you're worth it. And that was so inspiring to me. And I was, of course, like sad to hear about it, that, how those times were in terms of the mentality of the people. But it was really inspiring to me because my mom did the very same thing to me. I had the world telling me, you can't do it. My mom was like, you can, like, just push ahead. And that really created a character in me. I would have to think, like, if we get down to the exact moment where my entrepreneurial spirit was created, I would say probably the biggest influence is maybe like primary school and high school, on the sense that I was bullied a lot, right? So it's a mix of two things. I really wanted to win on anything that I did. It started like from when I was 5. Then I suffered through it my whole high school. And it wasn't because I really wanted to win, it was just because I had a stubborn mentality. But the more people picked on me, the more stubborn I became, sort of like, because I had myself to rely on. And I started to, not get so much affected by the way people said of me and so on. And I sort of built, let's say, a layer of defense, right? Like a little turtle shell. And when I came to adult life, I sort of realized that many people didn't have that. Like you'd say a comment to someone and then they would like break down and they were like, oh my God, what you said? And it's like, if they said it to me, it wouldn't really hurt me. And it's not because it doesn't hurt, it's because you're sort of used to it, right? So when I started creating things, and it wasn't like, I always had the desire of, I realized very early that the traditional path wasn't made for me. And it's something that it's like, I think you sort of have to feel that way, right? Like when I was paid a salary, one month I was consulting and they paid me a salary. And that month I wasn't doing anything because they didn't have any project for me. And I felt like such a cheat. I was like, what the fuck? I'm just sucking money from the system. Like, what am I doing here? What am I doing with my life? Like, I want to do something productive. And I remember the opposite feeling happened, like when I started paying someone a salary, it was like, well, why are they taking my salary? I would just, if I was in their situation, I would tell them, pay me this much for this or pay me more or something. It was really weird. But I feel that some people want the stability and some people want to take the risk. And it comes at a great risk a lot of times. And you're willing to do it. I think the single moment that probably shaped me more was when I was 17 or 18. In Spain, in Catalonia, there's a very popular day, which is St. George Day, right? I don't know if 23rd of April, have you experienced it? Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Probably this year wasn't as good. But all the other years, it's amazing. Like you technically, the tradition is that a man gives the woman he loves a flower, and that ends up being, your mom, your sister, your girlfriend, a girl you like, and the woman gives the man a book. And that's a good. I always like it because I love books. I love reading. And I was like, okay. I give a rose. It's 3-5 years. I get a book. That's really good.
Yeah.
I start on those terms.
I've never really understood this tradition, but I think it's very funny. Yes.
So I had a friend at the university, and he was like, why don't we just sell the roses? And I was like, it's a perfect idea. Like we're gonna profit from that, and it's one day. So we got 350 roses from one provider, and they were kind of expensive. Well, they were really cheap. They were 125 to 150. I don't remember exactly now, but you sell, like what they said, you sell them at 5 years. So in our heads, we were doing the math, and that was big. So we were like, okay, like that's when I guess that's the moment that sort of shapes you. Like you have that, you see the opportunity. What do you do in response, right? And I was like, okay, let's get more roses. Let's just get them, and let's get them cheaper. And that was my first thought. Like I can't. It just came from me, right? And I was like, okay, how do we do that? So we reached out to all the other providers. We did an Excel, which one had the cheaper prices, and we had one guys that were able to do a much better price, like 0.9, provided that you reached 750 roses. We're like, okay, we'll just reach 750, which is good. And then we actually can't sell 750 roses a day. Like that's like freaking rose every 2 minutes. Let's just get rid of 200. Let's give it to someone else, and let's just try to sell 500, right? So whole thing starts like that, and you give it to a friend. We sold them from, of course, at a little bit of profit, like 110. We get 20 cents per every rose, and we got 20 euros more in the pocket, and we get to that day. And I remember, like, it was all like little things, right? But we knew that placement was really important. So in those things, you can actually get a license near the Rambla Catalunya, which is the most famous street, and you cannot get a spot in the Rambla Catalunya because it's reserved for the entities, like let's say political parties, if you're an institution, nonprofit, and so on and so forth. And I told my friend, like, okay, let's do this. Let's get a license exactly on the corner with Rambla Catalunya and that street, and then let's put our spot at Rambla Catalunya. And I was like, okay, let's do it. But it's those little things. And I remember it now, but we were like really stressed. So we got it. We came in 6 a.m. or 5 a.m. or crazy early time. We spent, of course, like the whole other day cutting roses. My hands were bleeding from the thorns of the rose.
The spikes, the thorns,
Yeah. We got them on, and we got our spot. And nobody asked us for a license in the whole day. And that was amazing, because we really felt it was a really prime location. And it was right next to a red light. So we started selling. People would go through, and at the morning, the prices are high, but almost no one buys. And then they start dropping, right? I remember, like, we were also like, we tried, I think it was kind of amazing, because we did all the sort of like tactics that you would put in a startup. I probably had read the Lean Startup by then, or I was about to, but we also were wearing suits and nobody was. So we looked like really preppy. We were like always smiling at people. And then when I sort of realized that, when the light was red, some people were just stuck with me. I started pitching them, and they wanted to cross, but there was a red light, so they couldn't really go through. And I started developing my pitch around that. So I started being like, just hear me out until this light turns green, and I'll let you go. You have nothing more to do. And I kept pitching people and pitching people and pitching people, and we ended up selling all 500 of the roses at a very good price, like probably like, I don't know, like 4 years age or 3.5. And then we split the money, and we were like, dude, like we made 2,000 euros in one day. It's 1,000 each. Do people work 30 days for this shit? Like, what is that? And I was like, fuck, like I really want to do more of this. Like I don't want to work 30 days. I just want to be able to do this bigger and better, sort of. And next year we bought 10,000 roses. We got the provider from Holland. We got a way cheaper price. We distributed to other people. But I think it's at those breaking points where you can decide to sort of like stay still, or you can do something about it. And there's a layer that comes with you and your learnings, and there's a layer from what you've read in the books and so on and so forth. At least for me. But I would say it's pretty natural of me. Like I think there's some abilities that you have that either you're born with it, or some of them you learn. Like I have to learn how to speak slower, speak really fast. So that's something that I have to learn. My willingness to negotiate is always there. When I go to Morocco, I have the fun of my life, and I go there with my dad. He gets annoyed of all the hassling and all the things, and I just learn a couple of local words. I keep talking back the price. I walk out. I go to the store next door, so they see me and they come to me, they give me a better price. And in Morocco, the funny thing is, you're still getting scammed. It's just for the fun of negotiating, right?
Yeah.
But I love that thrill. It's just interesting.
That's so funny. Actually, I had a very similar experience, not with Morocco though, with selling something on the street. We were selling plums. Yeah, we were selling plums on the street in Ukraine when I was 12, and I had a very similar feeling. I got like 75 grivnas, which is like the currency, which by those times it was amazing money for a 12-year-old. I felt like, wow, what the fuck? Where is it that easy when you take the first step? So
yeah.
No, man, and thanks so much for opening up, because my personal theory is that actually people who are very driven and do lots of stuff and try to reach the highest points, I admire them a lot. And I think I also belong to those people. But actually I think that all of those people are deep inside hurt somewhere. And then try to.
It could be.
Yeah, but anyway, yeah. I mean, it's still kind of it's still like a kind of healing, or especially if you moving into the right direction and create some positive change in other people, this is amazing. So yeah, I just wanted to say like thanks for opening up, for sharing some stuff from your family or from school. Amazing, like really amazing. And well, lots of questions pop onto my mind. But for instance, you said that in the university you didn't really know what to do, or was a bit lost. I guess pretty much every one of us who studied in the university had this kind of feeling. So what would you advise to people in this kind of situation that feel lost in their undergraduate programs?
I was like really lost. Okay, like I wasn't just lost, I was extremely lost. Like now I may seem confident, things work out for me, and I'm all right. But if you looked at me when I was like 20, I had no idea what I wanted to do with my life. I really considered dropping industrial engineering. And so I was first of all getting us to choose what we wanted to do for the rest of our lives, or to pick our career when we are like 17, 16, sometimes in Spain, because you have to pick the bachelor. Doesn't make much sense, because you have no idea. Like I don't know. I remember I went to the US, and then I had a really good math teacher, and I was like, oh, I'm good at math. Let's do engineering. That was it. Like that's the thing that crossed my mind. I thought about it a bit more, but when it came to picking the engineering, I didn't really know what to pick, and so I picked industrial, which is the engineering for people that don't know what to pick. It's literally like that, right? You sort of learn a little bit of each.
I know so many people who studied industrial engineering.
And you do nothing about master. Yeah, what is it? Jack of all trades, master of none. Anyways, so I was in the degree. It was hard. Like we really suffered through the exams and everything. But I started like wondering, what are the outcomes? Like, what can I do with this after? And I think I already had a notion of like, there were classes where we had to, learn the shape of a drill in order to more accurately go through metal, And I was like, why does this matter? You're just going to code it, right? Like just learn how to code. So that was like, it felt really outdated. But I knew I didn't want to be in industrial engineering when after I finished university. So I was really thorned by that thought, broken down or conflicted by that thought. I joined business administration as I was doing. I joined business administration as I was doing the engineering degree, and I was doing an internship consulting in Accenture. So that was a really crazy year. And I also really didn't like business. It was like, I went through the first year. It was really easy. It was ridiculous. Like, I don't know. I didn't join it like a SADE or like a private university, but I would go to engineering class. I would suffer. I would go to consulting, would have to do these diagrams. Then I went to like business school, and I was like, okay, like you want me to do that? That's fine. Like it's just basic math, and I'm not trying to put that down. Like I think the way it works is it's easy at the beginning, and then it grows harder and harder, right? But because I had been through engineering and I'd suffered so much, I was just used to whatever they could throw at me. And then I remember I was like, I'm just gonna drop out of both. I think I thought at that point. I had a good advice from someone who was like, just drop out of BA, because that's clearly not worth it. Like you can do an MBA if you need it afterwards. And I think that was the right call. But again, I was still lost. I was super lost. And I was really lucky. I was really lucky because, so first of all, one of the things that I tried to do to address the fact that I was lost is sign up to as many activities as I could. So I would. There was a course to organize a job fair for companies at university. I did that. We started an entrepreneurship club. We would do bookly readings. We organized a hackathon. We organized a startup job fair. So those things are little experiences that really paid off for me in the long term. Not only for the friends that I've made, because some of the people that I met there are now entrepreneurs. So you kind of see the trend of the people that would join that and so on and so forth. Some of them are my best friends, but Sergio and Mark, which are like awesome. And we met exactly through that, through starting the entrepreneurship club together. I think that in that sense, I had an intuition that people wouldn't really care if I took one more year at university, or people wouldn't really care if I didn't have the best degrees. So it felt like it really was the right time to experiment and do as much as I could, even if I was stretching myself too thin, because I was, again, figuring out what I wanted to do, right? So that was awesome because, like now, for example, if I want to experiment, it comes at the expense of a hole in my CV and saying, oh, this is what I did this time in my life, or I took a sabbatical or whatever. At university is great because if you fail at everything, you will still put graduated from industrial engineering 2012, 2017. That's it. Nobody will ask anything, and if they ask, you can say whatever. But that was something, a really good decision. And then I had a lot of luck. Because those random moments, I joined a conference it was basically a conference for Nobel Prize winners, business leaders, scientists that was happening in Europe, and I got into organize because there was no other way I could have gotten elsewhere. And as I was organizing, we went there. And I met a scientist on the bus, and I kind of told him, like, I have no idea what to do with my life, and he sort of used the scientific method to walk me through, like, maybe a notion of what I actually wanted to do. And it turns out that he was the founder of Ventilator, and later on I ended up joining that as well. But it was really amazing because for the first time I came out of there and I was like, I have a plan, and my plan is this. I'm going to finish industrial engineering. I'm going to work to figure out what I want to do, but I'm actually going to do something else. I'm going to figure out if consulting is worth it, and so on and so forth. And for the first time, it felt like I had a sense of direction. But then it's interesting for entrepreneurs because, when you look at doctors, you think that they already have their life made out because, once they sort of pick a discipline, they're there for 10 years. They also have their doubts. They just don't show it. You don't interact with doctors anymore. Or as much as you would with an entrepreneur. But I feel like it's okay if you have doubts. It's important to sort of craft a plan. That plan doesn't have to come immediately, but it has to come from your heart, right? Like if you figure out what you truly want to do, you're going to be much happier than if you're just doing something because you feel like that's the right career and that's the right degree. Like picking a career that you don't want, or like even just going through consulting, feels like being on a highway stuck with a bunch of cars, right? I'd rather, my decision was just, I'm going to step down on my car. I'm going to walk side to the sideway and wave you as I pass through. And, first of all, you're going to laugh at me. You're going to be like, oh, this guy has no car. But then I'm the only one that can climb a mountain. It's going to be a way longer journey, but I can go wherever I want. And I'm sort of my decision. So I really, really enjoyed that. And, you have to be made for this. If you walk out of your car and you're like, oh my God, we have no security. They're going to steal our car. If that's your concern, then stay on the car. And try to get the best lane. That's such
a great metaphor.
Yeah.
No, I was thinking it makes so much sense to me.
Yeah. I was thinking as well, maybe if you want to go back to education, there's one probably a good relevant trend that I missed. But feel free, like ask me whatever you want.
Well, what did you want to say? You can continue.
I like it. No, so I feel like the good thing and the bad thing of the bootcamp. So good thing of a bootcamp is, you're going through exercises 8 hours a day, right? And when I went through my bootcamp, I remembered, we had a robot that would correct our exercises. And I think that was a great punching bag to figure out how good or how wrong you were. That's one layer, but you're still fighting with a robot, like once you're going through, I think the essential problem of education is that it's one direction. You have the teacher teaching you at traditional institutions. One teacher teaches 30 students. There's no real feedback from the students to the teacher. The teacher doesn't know if he's a good or bad teacher until the evaluation comes in. and the students cooperate with themselves only when they're incentivized to it. We've all been through that at university, if somebody that is a really bad student wants to join your study group, you're like, we're kind of full, something like that. If somebody's a really good student, you kind of want to join the group, and maybe they do the same thing to you. You maybe share some exercises because you want to get something back, and that's sort of like the trade and the life of university, right? But I think that I now have been doing this master's in finishing the master's in AI in Denmark, and in here. So first of all, something that I was really surprised is lower class size, more teachers per student, but also the idea of like the peer feedback. So in Denmark, it really felt like we were working together with our peers and the teachers to pass the exam. In Spain, it sort of feels the perception is it's you versus the teacher, and you have to outsmart them. And I think the peer feedback, not only for example, when we implemented, so to give you an example of how that works, like when we had our bootcamp, I didn't have the time to code a robot that would solve all the exercises because we just had crafted it and I wanted to launch. Students were producing 40 hours of exercises, 8 hours of exercises, or 6 hours a day per student, if you multiply it times the number of students, right? Never in the world could I possibly correct all of that. And neither can university teachers. Like my mom can't keep up with this. Like she's correcting on the weekend, some exams, some random things. But I think the model is flawed because you're just relying on the teacher as like the higher education institution. Like he's the one that has to validate all of this. But if you think about, you have to flip the education journey, right? Like if the teacher goes on to become a mentor on your journey, like I'm here to help, you have to develop this is what you want to do, then you can hopefully leverage all the students to help each other and be critical of each other, right? So if you incorporate peer feedback, and there's I think there's like a platform in Denmark that is like on all the universities, and like it just all of them have it as a standard. It's called EduFlow, and you go through there, and the cool thing is that not only are you graded on what you are presenting or submitting, but you're also graded on how you're giving the review, right? But it's crazy because that sort of saves everybody a lot of time, because you get the right feedback that you needed to get, and the teachers don't have to do as much, and you improve not only from seeing your work, but like I was always curious about what my peers presented. Like you want to see what's the benchmark. And in engineering, that was the whole thing. I had an exam that had a 5, and that was like one of the best grades because everybody had a 2. It matters how you are to the average. So I think that's something that I think should be implemented in traditional universities, especially in order to be able to accelerate the pace in which they learn. Because if you put all the weight of the learning in the teacher is a one-man band. Like they can't keep up. They're just doing things, and they have to go on these meetings, this thesis, and you have to renovate the curriculum somehow. I think that's a really great way on getting people to cooperate and accelerate the pace of learning. That's just one of my takes. And I think that it could sort of shape the way universities are organized. I think Nordic countries are obviously pioneers.
Is it just in Denmark where you have noticed this kind of paradigm?
I think Sweden and Norway do it too, but I feel that so it may also have to do with the values in Denmark, right? Like you have, let's say, the Lutheran values of the church, but also the values of the society, right? In Denmark, you have 8 different types of recycling. That's just a little bit too much for a Spaniard like me. But if you don't recycle, it's not because you could get your trash and just throw it out randomly and nobody would know, right? But the mentality is not no one will know, is it will harm the others. Like what I'm doing here is creating a harm for the other people. If I'm skipping a red light, and I have to say I haven't still fully gotten used to not skipping red lights, because that's what you do in Barcelona if you're biking. If you skip a red light, it's not about you that are going faster. It's about the danger that you put the other drivers to. Like there's sort of like a much more societal pressure for doing things right. But I think, and I should stop skipping red lights. But what I mean is that I think if you translate this into education, I think it could essentially than the way it's done today, because you want a policeman at every single crossing of the education saying, okay, you can go through. okay, you've done a good job. And those are the teachers. But not only do they have to tell if you've done a good job, they also have to create the job, they also have to evaluate it, they have to teach it, and they're overloaded. Like if you think about teaching, like also Finland is a good example on this. Teachers are really well valued in Finland, and in many of the countries, oh, you're a teacher? Yeah, that's tough, and if you think about it, education is one of the most important values or things that you can possibly do, right? Like I think that we have to figure out a system that removes a workload from them, and essentially helps them be good at what they're good, which is teaching people and getting them to learn. And it doesn't mean that we have to rely on them for the correction and everything like that. And I think automation is one way of doing it. But I think you could also create an algorithm and all of these things to rank. But then problems like in the UK will happen where you have an algorithm now. The students haven't been able to deliver their exams because coronavirus. An algorithm ranked them. And wow, little surprise, private schools kids got their grades pumped up much better than public school kids. So, you're amplifying the same biases that the society is already replicating. And that's a problem that has to do with algorithms itself and the bias of the data. But, I feel like we have, education has to change. That's a given. Everybody says that. Nobody has an answer for how it's going to change. I'm not gonna say I do. I think my intuition is that peer learning is definitely one of the ways. Flip learning as well, on the sense of saying, okay, do the homework at home. That's actually something that we actively implement in AI Saturdays. We give them the workloads, the things that they have to read, and they come to the sessions to do the work. Because the work's the hard part. It's like, I remember at university, I was like, yeah, I can read the PowerPoint, but can I do the exercise? Most of the times, no. Like read the PowerPoint at home, come to class to do the exercise. I think that's also a really good mentality. Probably countries like Singapore have really strong models on these. But I feel like, for example, Singapore and Korea, you have many, many student hours. Like Korea, I think you have places where you go to study and they give you an IV fluid on your veins so that you don't have to drink. I mean, it's also Asian mentality is a little bit hardcore on this, right? But if you don't get an A, you're a failure to the family. But the thing that does is, yes, it achieves very high results in terms of marks. They can get into Harvard or Cambridge, whatever. But first of all, they're not happy. And second of all, they're not creative. They just learn how to memorize really well. They learn the processes. But if you think about creativity today, it's mostly centered around Europe and the US. So I think doing more is not necessarily the answer. I think you have to do things a different way. Yeah, my intuition is that peer feedback, it worked for a bootcamp, it works for a nonprofit, it works for Danish and Nordic universities. I think it will work for companies too. It's just a matter of trust, right? I remember when I was in my consulting company, when we would do remote hours, we would have to log our time and say what we had done with each of the remote hours. And somebody would have the ability to review that. Well, if you try to do that now in coronavirus, first of all, you're crazy. Second of all, you don't have the time to review whatever your employees are doing. Just trust them to do what they're going to do and then move on with your life. If they don't do the work, fire them. But yeah, I think that it's a better way of learning. And I think that's one of the directions in which it's going to go. So we have micro schools, to just recap, right? Because it's a thread we commented on. I think micro schools, they're definitely going to happen in the US. And I think part of that is because the US education system is so flawed already that you have to do very little improvement to sort of fix it. Bootcamps, my intuition is more on longer bootcamps, more than 8 weeks, and income sharing agreements, although I don't really know how well they're going to add up to Europe, because Europeans, when you talk to them about the money that you have to pay later, they really see a loan, but it's sort of like a really good loan that you only have to pay if that's successful. And I think peer feedback and flip learning are probably, some of the areas in which it's going to go. And of course, that's also the economists when they say, I think economy is going to grow 8%, and it never happen. But that would be my bet. That would be my bet on the future of education.
Well, peer reviewing is, I think, it's a very powerful tool and actually method to do it, because it's also expanding the perspectives on how to evaluate your work. Because if there's just one teacher, it's not necessarily always fair how the teacher can evaluate. And we also need to learn how to evaluate our work and the work of others ourselves. So to be teachers for ourselves. So I think this is something we should definitely incorporate in our lives. So I would love to discuss many more things with you, Jan, but I think we're running out of time. So the last question I would like to ask is what you're working on right now and how can somebody help you with it? And of course, how can people reach out to you?
Sure. So what am I working on right now? It's a really good question. So when coronavirus came into place, physical bootcamps essentially stopped existing. In our case, with the Academy, we pivoted to doing corporate trainings, which essentially at that time were still worth it. I think now with, I don't believe the stock market numbers, like in the sense, like I don't think the stock market behaves like the economy is. Like if you walk in Barcelona right now in the center, you can see many stores are closed and so on. And, we may not be able to see that yet, but I think that something bad is coming. And I don't want to be like, whatever, Nostradamus, but I feel, there's definitely been an impact with the GDP and the economy, especially in countries like Spain and Italy. So I think that's going to affect companies too. What I'm working on is how can I maximize the impact that I can deliver or to get people to learn AI. And let me elaborate on this. Like, I want to make sure that I do a really good teaching and the people are really happy. And what I did through Academy was part of that, right? Like the students that we work with got hired. When a student calls you and tells you, I got a job thanks to you or because of your introduction and so on and so forth. And I feel really confident. That's a really, really special moment. But it's also only one student in the sense that, you're aware that there's 125,000 slots needed. So I think the analogy here is, if you have to choose between giving a laser, you had a really powerful laser into someone, it would definitely produce a change. Let's say it's a beneficial laser. That's one way you can change someone. You can go and you can one-to-one help them out and change. But that's not scalable because you're investing 1 hour, they're getting 1 hour. Bootcamps, a little bit scalable. You're investing 1 hour, 20 people are getting 1 hour out of you. Get something. The other layer is, an example, a conference or a podcast, right? You are putting 1 hour, we're putting 1 hour here, and maybe thousands of people may listen to this. So for me, there's much more potential of impact with that. The problem is it feels more like a rain, like you listen to a podcast, you may act on it, you don't, and then that goes away. So like, the same way you get wet and you forget about it. So what I want to do is figure out a way to sort of create a rain of lasers. And that's like the analogy that I'm trying to go after. But I want to make sure I can deliver the best education at scale on the field that I care about. And I think now I'm sort of mapping out what's the whole context with coronavirus, how it's going to happen, if remote's going to stay or we're going to go back to in-person. But what I would really like to do is scale the impact that I've been able to have with, let's say, small batches of people and do it with many people at the same time. How can someone help me with that? So if you're passionate about the same things that I'm passionate and you also feel like you want to create a rain of lasers in the world of data science and AI, definitely reach out. The ways people can find me, I'm a lot in Twitter these days at JCLLOBET and LinkedIn. Yeah, I think that's most platforms that I'm at, but I will respond to like pigeon messages or anything that gets to me in the world of the internet. So an email is also fine, whatever works. Yeah,
perfect. I will leave the links in the description so that people can get in touch. It has been a great pleasure, Jan. Really.
Same.
Thank you so much for joining me
today. Thank
you
for a great interview. I really, really enjoyed it. And yeah, I hope to hear more on the podcast and that you can also create a really massive rain of impact through your podcast.
Great. Thanks a lot. And that's it for today. Thank you for listening, and I hope that you've enjoyed this episode with me and Jan. And if you did, consider supporting us on Patreon. Creating this content takes us time and energy, but we hope that you like it and that you learn with us together. We'll see you in the next episode of Data for Future.